Alright, quick little update for you. I've gotten a start on the chassis wiring for the car. When I bought it, it came with boxes and boxes of parts, and one of those boxes had a brand new universal hot rod style wiring harness in it. Usually I just wire up my cars from scratch using some universal fuse boxes and stuff like that, but since I had this, I chose to use it. It's worked out good. It has a lot more fuses in the fuse box than I need, but that's all right. And so I went about first installing the fuse box here. I wanted to install it high enough that you normally won't be able to see it and feet won't get in the way of it. And when I eventually put a kick panel in here, we can have it cover that with a little access panel. And then above it, I have a couple of relays and the flasher for the turn signal. And so there's a bunch of wires all over. Everything's been run but not terminated right now. So you can see these wires right. Ah, fuck.
Yes, 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 he must have been gravely hurt.
I don't know why I just did that. So you can see these wires right here are all going to go to the ignition switch. And then I have these wires here, which are all going to go to the gauge cluster. And these wires here are all going to go to the turn signal switch. And finally, these right here are going to go to the headlight switch. So one of the things I'll have to do as well is figure out what needs to be converted on the dash, because obviously this was a 6-volt car, and if we put 12 volts to some of the gauges, they're going to burn out, and we're going to have to replace all the bulbs in the car with the proper bulbs. So that's one thing that I gotta do a little research on and do some planning for. The harness for the rear of the chassis goes up through the A-pillar here. There's plenty of room to run it down, even with a connector. And so then the harness just runs up here on top. And this right here is the dome light wire. So I'll have a dome light. This is the override switch right here. And then over here is the little button that tells the system when the door is open. And so the harness is run all the way along here, down through to the back. And so this is going to be your left turn, right turn, driving lights, brake lights, fuel level, sender, and fuel pump. And so I just have this back here just kind of loose for now. I'm going to put the taillights in. I have a factory accessory backup lamp that I'm going to have to mount. And then I'll have to get the sender wire run from the tank underneath to the top, so I need to decide where I'm going to put a grommet in to be able to pass the wiring through. The other big things back here that I have to do is the airlift performance manifold and all the associated wiring with that, and then the 2 compressors. I'm going to keep all that wiring separate from the chassis harness. It might be run the same, it might be run along the same area there, but I'm going to keep it separate. So if I ever need to add anything on or diagnose anything, it's a lot easier than having a huge jumble of all the wires together. So we'll see. I may end up running all of the airlift stuff over the driver's side just to keep it that much separate as well. But so that's all the back, and then I'll bring you around to the front here. And the front, I have the starter in now and the alternator wired to it, the battery cable being run to the back where the battery will be located. This is the starting wire here that comes from the chassis harness. This is my coil wire, and those all come through a nice grommet right here that I've installed, and the harness splits, and then the chassis harness for the front runs along the outside of the frame rail, just in an effort to keep the engine bay as clean as possible, so you don't have a whole wiring harness going through. Plus, I'm kind of out of real estate. Right here I have the fuel line, the air line, and the alternator line being run along the frame rail. So without just zip tying this wiring harness to all the rest of that, there's really no clean way to install it. So I have installed a couple of P-clamps here. I'll install another P-clamp on the frame behind the airbag, and it comes up here, and then I just have all the wires in a coil. So this is going to be high beam, low beam, left turn, right turn. It's going to be the parking lights, or just the running lights, and then there's a horn in here, and I think that's it for this harness. So once I get the fenders on and get all that stuff kind of figured out, then I can run the wiring and terminate the harness. But for now, it's just going to be hanging out right up here. I'm not at the stage yet where I want to be putting fenders and whatnot on it. I'll be getting there pretty quick though. I'll need to modify the inner fenders first because of the Mustang 2 suspension and the shock towers here, but that's a project I'll take on a little later. So I've got a really good start on the wiring. One of the next things I need to do is buy a battery, mount the battery, then I can finish the battery cables. I also have a bulkhead union for the battery cable that is going to be going right here on the floor next to the grommet. So the fuse box will get its battery power right from that bulkhead lug right there, and then anything else that needs battery power will be able to grab it from right there. And then I'll probably have a second battery bulkhead union in the back near the air tank that the air compressor relays and air system will get its battery power from. I still haven't figured all that stuff out yet. I wanted to get the chassis harness a little further along before I start doing the air wiring and whatnot. So that's the update. Did all that yesterday, and so it's going to kind of stay like this until I do a little more research on the gauges and everything else. I have an aftermarket ignition switch coming. I do have the original one, but I think with the extra amps and voltage going through the car, it'd be nice just to get a more modern new one that I'll be able to retrofit in there and then have a nice set of keys for it. So that's the plan for that. So yeah, it's coming along really good. One of the other things that I've done, and it's not completely finalized yet, is I put the passenger side fender on, and I got the fuel filler run. So it's just the, no, let me put the light on here. So it's just the factory tube run down. There's a coupler, and then there is some tubing that I had laying around, and that goes to another coupler and then goes into the tank. All right, I have been continuing to jam out on the wiring for the car, and today I finally had the motivation to start tackling the wiring for the dashboard. And so I first started by cleaning all of the chrome trim, cleaning up the clock and the speedometer. Then I went about doing all the wiring. So we're converting to 12 volts in the car, so I replaced all of the bulbs. I still have a voltage reducer coming here that will be for the gas level gauge. And I have an aftermarket key switch in here so that the starter is on the dash now. Before it was a foot starter on the floor. So it's got like a painless performance universal keyed ignition switch here, and got that pigtail wired. This right here is the stock headlight switch with the dimmer function, and we have all of that wired up. I'm just using some cheap spade style connectors now. Eventually I may switch out to like a Deutsche style connector, which I usually use on all the race car stuff I do, but for this I didn't feel it was super necessary. A little more cumbersome and bulky with this, but certainly a lot cheaper. Had to do a lot of research online to figure out how to wire a few certain things. I had taken notes here and made some little diagrams, taken some photos of everything previously, and I have a lot of the old wiring and stuff right there in the box. The only thing I'm confused about is the ammeter, which really doesn't meter amps. It just shows you whether or not the system is charging or discharging. I want to keep everything functioning, so I wired it in, but there's a lot of information out there. That's the problem with the internet, is there's too much information. Some people say, you know, when you're modernizing the car a bit, you have air suspension and a more modern stereo and stuff, to not use the ammeter because it's a risk of meltdown or whatever, or having, you know, a possible problem where some of the if the ammeter stops working, some of the functions that connect to it will no longer work. And then other people are like, I've been, you know, building every single car of mine, utilizing it just fine, and so I'm gonna wire it up and see if it works. If it doesn't, I'll play around with a few things, and if I can't get it to work, then we'll just bypass it, and that will be that. At that point, I will do a little rewiring down here on the headlight switch area. This is the ammeter right here, and it all connects to this pigtail. So I have two main pigtails here that connect to the chassis harness. This is the ignition switch. This is the headlight switch, as well as a few things for the ammeter, and then also the gas gauge sending unit wire comes up here, this little guy right there. And so this is all the wiring for the dash, and we'll have to do some testing. I have a glove light box rigged up here. I do have a brand new glove box from Chevys of the 40s going in. And so the next step here really is going to be put the dash back in, make a few final connections. I have 2 wires I need to run that have to do with the ammeter, and then I have to switch one of the wires, the wire that basically feeds the headlight switch right now, goes to the fuse box, to a portion of it that is fed by the battery, and I want to switch that over so that it's on the accessory or the run circuit, so that it doesn't have power at all time, and that way the ammeter should function, because it'll be reading the difference between the battery voltage and the general voltage in the system with the alternator, and the tiny difference between those should show if it is charging or starting. So I'll just have to do some testing, keep an eye on it. Some people have said that the problem with the ammeters too is that when you wire them up, even if they function, say you the engine's not running, so the alternator's not spinning, but you have the radio turned on, well, that's going through the ammeter, and the ammeter doesn't like it because it's trying to measure small amp differences between the charging and the battery circuit, and now you're putting a lot more load through it since there's no alternator charging going on. There's only battery voltage to it, and so there's just going to be the first time I put power to the system, I'm really going to have to make sure no wires are heating up, nothing starts smoking, have a fire extinguisher nearby. I mean, that's like the worst case scenario. So that's just some things that I've kind of learned. But yeah, the dash is turning out nice. I have a lot of the under dash wiring figured out here. Just looks like a spaghetti western right now, but this connects to the factory headlight switch, and then this will go down to the dimmer switch on the floor where you turn it from low beam to high beam. This is the wiring that goes to the ignition circuit. This is one of the new wires that goes to the ammeter circuit, so I'm just going to have to run that. This connects to my Guide 6002 turn signal lever, and so when you take basically these out of the equation, we're just left with these 5 wires, so it no longer looks like quite the spaghetti western. And this is for a fog light switch that'll be a Remy Delco under the dash. One of these is the power for the radio that we will reduce to 6 volts. I'm going to try to use a factory radio. And then these other 2 are just random wires that get 12 volts from the fuse box over there for anything in the future, such as if I go like electric wipers, or if I add any other accessory like that, like maybe a underdash heater. So I just always run a couple extra wires, and then I'll just basically loop them up and hide them somewhere. That way, down the line, if I do want to add some circuits, I don't have to just kind of hastily or sloppily add them on top of the existing harness. And then I have a couple extra 12-volt circuits that will be tucked in behind the fuse box too, if I need to add anything else down the line, like if I upgrade to a more modern stereo and need power for that and an amplifier, I'll have that. So I'm gonna get the dash back in here and keep jamming on that. I'll show you the Guide 6002 here that I got. Super nice condition, and there wasn't a lot of good information online about this guy and how to wire it. So I took my multimeter and set it on the ohm setting, and I sat there and I probed every single pair of connections, and I made a diagram. This is part of it, and I basically mapped out, this is it right here. I mapped out every single connection that was happening in the middle, the left, and the right. And that allowed me to figure out, okay, this connection is clearly the left front blinker. This one's the right front blinker. Since the taillights here are just a dual filament, not a triple filament, you obviously have your running light and then your brake light, but then you also have to have the turn signal. So the turn signal and the brake light are the same thing, and so all that circuitry happens within the switch there, so that say you're on the brakes and you hit the left turn signal, it'll start flashing that brake off. But say you have the left turn signal on, you're not on the brakes, it'll flash that on. And so that's why you need to have that internal to the switch. You can't just connect them together in like a toggle switch or some other format there. And so I had to just do a process of elimination with the ohm meter. You know, eventually I figured out what was going to be the brake switch, which one was going to be the flashed input from the flasher, and then there was one just for the indicator light here. So this will actually flash on and off as the outside turn signal lights flash. And so I got this all wired up. This one I did put a nice Deutsche connector on that again connects right up to this one. And so yeah, making some really good progress on the wiring here. Have a few things left to kind of figure out and wrap my head around, but that list is getting shorter and shorter, and we'll be cleaning things up, and in not too long I'll be ready to wrap the wiring in some loom. I also have the taillights and everything figured out now, so this wiring I can connect. I'll have running light, brake light, left turn signal, and reverse light. I have the nice aftermarket reverse light for here, and so I can wire that stuff in. I also got a pigtail connector for the BorgWarner T5 transmission that I have, and got that installed and wired in, so now the reverse light will actually function when I go over into reverse.
I haven't been allowed to drive for 3 years, so I am not a good judge of that.
And so I'm just making lots of little progress. I mean, the last 10% of a build like this takes 50% of the time, and the wiring is a real big part of that, especially when you have, air system and you're trying to retain some of the functions like a dome light and dimmer switch and adding in turn signals where it didn't originally have it, all that stuff. So trying to get as far as I can on the wiring here. And then this happened the other day, which is sweet. The oil pan just started leaking, and it happened as winter left and spring came, and it just sprung a leak. And oil pans for this engine, I haven't been able to find a brand new replacement that I know will work, because this engine came in various cars and trucks, I believe, and so the sumps were different and the windage tray and everything like that. And so it seems like if you're getting an oil pan, you might need like a different oil pickup and windage tray. And so I'm probably just going to wind up taking that oil pan off, cleaning it up, and welding the damn thing up. It has some dents in it and everything too, so I was going to take it off and hammer those dents out. And so that's just one more thing that I have to add to my to-do list here, but we're making progress. I'll check back in with you guys when the dash is installed and the wiring is a little further along. I'm hoping to be at a place in a couple of weeks where I can test it. Right now, I only have 1 day a week where I can work on it. That's Sundays, because I'm working about 65, 70 hours a week. And so Sunday's my day to be out here, so progress is coming slow. But check back in with you guys. Thanks for watching.
The vacuum cleaner man, he's seen my tits.